Welcome to the Everyday Miracles podcast, where real life stories of hope and inspiration are shared. Every day, miracles are happening all around us, yet we rarely hear anything about them. Why is that? I'm Julie Hedenborg, and I've committed my time and energy to bring these stories to you, including some of my own personal experiences. My hope is that you'll be impacted the same way that I was. Join me in my journey to inspire change in a world that so desperately needs it. Hello, and welcome back to Everyday Miracles podcast. This is Julie Hedenborg, and I am so excited today. I have a very special guest that a lot of you are very excited to hear from. His name is Chaplain David Carl, and he is the Senior Executive Director of Spiritual Care at a major hospital in Charlotte, one of the premier, and it's within one of the largest healthcare systems in the country, and it's where I used to work. So he has a Master of Divinity degree from Drew Theological School, and he has been a chaplain for 45 years, and he's been 30 of those years. He just celebrated his 30th anniversary with this hospital system. So I'm going to turn over focus to him. I would like for him to just, if you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to become a chaplain. That would be awesome to hear.
Well, thank you for this invitation to be with you today. So my being a chaplain was never planned. So when I was 16 years of age, I experienced something extraordinary, a call, if you will. I heard during a worship service, traditional worship service in the United Methodist Church in Richmond, Virginia, sitting there behaving myself, listening to the sermon, when everything got tuned out, and I heard this voice, which I understand now to be God's voice, say, "You will be a minister." And that was it. And then I tuned back into the sermon that was being preached. And I turned to my sister, 2 years older, and said, "Did you hear that?" She said, "What?" And I said, "Did you hear that voice?" She said, "Pay attention to the sermon, David." I mean, so I sat with that for a week or so, and then it just reverberated in me. What I didn't know is that how common that kind of a phenomena is. About 35% of Americans experience something extraordinary, according to the Gallup poll. But I didn't know where to talk about that. So I did finally bring it up to my parents, and I think I heard God's voice and said I was going to be a minister, and they were just all excited. I happen to be United Methodist. I'm out of Richmond, Virginia. And so my thought was I was going to be a minister of a congregation. That was my whole intent. So I went on to go to college, went on to Drew Theological School, as you already named, with the full intention of going into taking a small church outside of Richmond and starting my career as a parish pastor. When I got an invitation to go and do a specialized study in a federal psychiatric hospital in Washington, D.C., it's something called clinical pastoral education, which is a education for pastors like myself who need to get more clinically astute. We recognized we needed that as a discipline back after World War II, when many ministers came back from the battlefield and they looked their bishops or rabbinic authorities, whoever it was, they looked them in the eye and said, "What were you thinking sending us out there unprepared?" And so what grew out of that was a educational formation opportunity for clergy to learn and religious to learn how to be more clinically astute in the provision of care. Mm-hmm. So I went to an accredited center that was teaching this course with the intention of being there for a summer, an internship. Never even cross my mind that I would fall in love working with the mentally ill, but I did. So to the degree that they asked me to stay on for a residency, which I did. Then they asked me to stay on for a second year residency. Again, my bishop's getting nervous now because I'm not taking that little church that was appointed. And then in the middle of my second year of residency, they asked me to come on faculty. And so, which I did, and went on to get certified as an educator with what's called the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. There are about 900 of us nationally who are certified to teach what we teach. And there are about 450 centers in the country that are accredited to teach what we teach. We happen to have one here. So all of that's to say, where I thought I was going to the parish, I ended up in serving in a federal psychiatric hospital, was there for just over 9 years, felt a professional calling to go into more of a leadership administrative position. So moved to Huntington, West Virginia, where I started up a department of pastoral care and education, as well as was the administrator of the department there in a 300-bed trauma center. I thought I was going to be there for 3 years. I stayed 6 because I felt I loved where I was. My eldest was born there. And then and my interrelationships with Marshall University just allowed for some added opportunities to teach in the med school. And so now I had this bridge of being an assistant clinical professor with the Marshall Med School, taking medical residents on rounds with me who wanted to learn about what do chaplains do. Well, I'm going on with my story here, but it was from there, it would have taken a lot to get me out of there because I just was so enjoying that. But what got me out of there was a phone call from here inviting me to come and assume this position back in, 1989. So an offer I couldn't refuse. So it larger program, larger hospital. We now are working with chaplains across Atrium Health, which is now covering 3 states, 44 hospitals, 900 care locations. So we are, it's a wonderful opportunity to be a spiritual care provider.
Yes. So I have some burning questions. I know you've told me one of your stories already, and I just want to hear some of the most miraculous stories that you've witnessed or seen, if you could share some of those.
Well, I'm thinking of the one that I already shared with you. So being in a hospital, it's a privilege to visit with patients and families at the more fragile times, more susceptible times. And so on this one occasion, I was asked to help out with my chaplain on call, who was covering a couple of traumas at the time. But he needed help in medical intensive care, which I was glad to go and provide and supplement what he was doing there. A woman, I would say, the matriarch of a family, had been injured severely in a car accident. She was in a coma. She was unconscious. She was swollen up probably twice her size from the blunt of the trauma. The family was requesting a chaplain to come and offer a prayer, a blessing. And they thought she was dying. And turns out she wasn't, but she was not looking good. And she was unconscious and, like I said, in a coma. So I'll go upstairs, and so I enter into this intensive care room, which, as you know, can be small. And there are 15 family members packed in there. They just insisted on being with her. And nobody was going to arm wrestle them to do differently. So I go in, and so I introduce myself as the chaplain as I go in the doorway. Oh, great, we were looking for you, and come on in. And so a little path was being made for me. I'm making my way to the head of the bed because I want to speak with the patient who I know can hear me, even though she's in a coma.
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm making my way there, people are greeting me, and one person said, "Now, Chaplain, she's Christian, you know." Well, I didn't know that, but thank you for letting me know. I'm glad to be aware of her background, and got a little further towards the head of the bed. "Well, Chaplain, you know, one of her favorite prayers is the Lord's Prayer." And I said, "Well, that's also great to know. Thank you." And so I finally get to the head of the bed, and I said, "Miss So-and-so, I'm Chaplain Carl. I'm here with the spiritual care department. Your family, who is, as you know, is present in this room. They've asked me to come and offer a prayer and a blessing over you. I do understand you're a Christian, and I happen to have with me some holy oil, which I'm glad to make the sign of the cross on your forehead as I offer this blessing. I just want to let you know what you're feeling here. Your eyes are shut, your face is covered with a cloth. I know you're wrestling with a bit of a fever here, but again, I want you to know what I'm saying and what I'm doing. So here I come with the holy oil, and I offered a blessing and a brief prayer. And I said, now I want to close our prayer time with I'm going to invite your family to say the Lord's Prayer with me, which they did. Mm-hmm. And with that, we were done. And that was about a 10-minute visit. So as I go out the door, again, gratitude, appreciate that. I don't go back there because that's not my place of assignment, okay? Yeah. So the chaplain who's over that arena of medical intensive care picked up from there. And so the support the family got was with that individual from then on. So I didn't see them again. But 8 weeks later, I'm in need to go to a mall to do some shopping. Now I've got to confess, I don't like malls. When I go to a mall, I don't know. I want to get in and out of there as fast as I can. I want to get what I need and go. I'm not into the shopping modality, and my schedule was pretty busy that day anyway. So I go in, and lo and behold, I got what I needed. I'm on my way out. There's the door out to the parking lot. I see the light coming through the door. And so I am just about ready to within a couple of yards of the door when I hear Chaplain Carl. And I turn around, and there's a woman sitting near a fountain at the entrance of the mall. She said, "Chaplain Carl, come over here." And I was looking at her, and I teach around town some. Yeah. And so it's amazing to me how many people want to call me out in public places to tell me what they didn't like about a point I made when I was teaching. And so I'm looking at her like, which audience was she in? Yes. Just a little tentative. And she said, "Chaplain Carl, come over here. I want to thank you." Well, I picked it up then. I went right over there, and it turns out it was her. It was the same patient. Oh my goodness. Again, who was unconscious, in a coma, eyes covered with a cloth. But she recounted to me everything I said, everything I did. She picked me out of hundreds of others in that busy mall, called me by name, and it just reminded me that we are multi-sensory beings. So she was watching me the whole time I was in that room, and was visualizing that, and frankly, I think recording that. Surely as we're recording this session, she had that recorded in her mind, and to the place where 8 weeks later, I'm getting called out in a rather busy place.
Wow, that's amazing. So she never physically saw you?
No.
Do you think she was having like an out-of-body experience, or she just had some other sense that, there wasn't someone with her that like pointed you out to her, or?
No, nothing like that. I think my experiences have been that it would not be unusual for her to have had an out-of-body experience, and for her to be observing from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious to know if you have any stories that would be in the topic of angels, in the category of angels. Do you have any stories where you've experienced someone who has shared an experience with you about angels personally?
Absolutely. So a number of patients have shared with me as I had visited with them, and I think patients can pick up whether or not you're open to hear
Mm-hmm.
things that are extraordinary, things that are above our five senses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one particular person was sharing with me this story. This patient was suffering with cancer. She'd been to a double mastectomy. She was getting incredible amounts of radiation therapy, chemotherapy. Um, she was just kind of in and out. It wasn't clear whether or not she was going to survive her stay. Um, and as she was going through this, she's later recounting this to me, as she was going through this semi-conscious, paraconscious stage, she said she clear as a bell, she saw at the foot of her bed an angel. And the angel was dressed in pink. She was very clear about what she saw. But on either side of the angel was her maternal grandmother and her paternal grandmother,
Wow.
both of whom had died. And so at the foot of her bed, here's an angel and her two grandmothers. And the intent of the visit by the angel was to say, you're going to be all right. And with the two grandmothers nodding, they didn't say anything, but they just nodded. And with that, the vision went away, or she closed her eyes, but somehow that was enough to take in. But that edified her to cope with, go further with, and go through what was the continual treatment. Sometimes the very tough treatment, as you would know as a nurse, that sometimes the treatment is more painful than the actual dis-ease on occasion. But she came through that and still recalls that as a turning point for her own healing, was the assurance, the divine assurance that she got, with the reassurance from the presence of her two grandmothers in apparitional form.
Wow.
And I share that sometimes with, because I get asked that sometimes when I'm speaking in churches, and I sometimes I get this feedback. Well, Chaplain, I thought you weren't supposed to get in touch with ghosts. I mean, aren't ghosts? Aren't you supposed to avoid ghosts? I mean, I said, well, I that's not my thought. Some people talk about a holy ghost, as a matter of fact. But I do think there was a time historically in the church's tradition, and maybe it is referred to biblically, there are people who've tried to trick some people and mislead some people into whether it's a clean spirit, unclean spirit, whatever. Mm-hmm. I do get it that you get misled sometimes. Yeah. I said, he said, well, I just don't think it's right, Chaplain. He pressed me. I think it's wrong to talk about ghosts, and I must say I'm just a little concerned that you, as a ordained minister, would be sharing a story like that. I said, well, I hear you. I said, but now you belong to this church, sir? He said, yes. I said, this is a Christian church. Yes. Yes. I said, does that mean you're a Christian, sir? He said, well, yeah, I'm a Christian. So now I'm talking to him. And I said, well, I'm just wondering what you do with the story that's in the Bible. It's in the New Testament. It's a story about Jesus who needs to go aside and pray. A couple of his disciples follow him, and what they see is, as they're observing him from a distance, all of a sudden, two ghosts appear. One was Elijah and the other was Moses. Now, Moses has only been dead for 1,500 years, and Elijah had only been dead for 800 years, but there they were in full apparition form, talking to Jesus, and the two disciples independently are observing this to the place where they say, wow, this is incredible. Shouldn't we build some kind of a altar or tabernacle here to commemorate this incredible experience? To which Jesus said, no, let's get on to what we got to get going on to. So I just wasn't sure how you interpret that story, sir. And well, he got quiet, and with the realization that, there are no absolutes. Yeah, people can use stories to cause you dis-ease, but there are also some very edifying stories where persons have experienced the apparitions of loved ones. In this case, I particularly think that this was at a time where Jesus, as a human, was getting ready to face his own death, and I think he was getting some counsel from people who knew about what it was like to die, and was maybe bringing some similar reassurance as the two grandparents were to that woman.
Yes,
were bringing some reassurance that a transition would be had.
Yes, that is amazing. I have a question for you in regards to angels. As a nurse in the ICU for those 2 years, I'd witnessed families tell me, oh, so-and-so came to visit my mom and that person's been dead. And I know that people were often greeted by spiritual beings. And sometimes it was an angel. I don't know if it was an angel in the form of the actual person, their spirit that was coming back, or is it the angel just appearing that way to give comfort to the person? And I always wondered that. Is it actually the spirit of the relative that's coming? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think all of the above could be true. So my experience of that is persons have experienced and have shared their experience of visitation by angels, unexplained, unexplainable. So I'm thinking of one gentleman I went to visit. This was late at night. I go into his room. I was just making some late rounds and wanting to bring some further assurance to hopefully bid him a good night's sleep, frankly. And he had been troubled with a couple of things. And he said, "Oh, Chaplain, I'm glad you're here. Did you see that angel that just left?" And I said, "I can't say that I did. Tell me about that." And this is what I do. I teach my chaplains to find out more.
Yeah.
So I said, "Well, tell me about who that was, what the angel looked like." And he described someone very graphically. It was not this the same angelic pink figure. It was more of a someone who was dressed rather normally, but who he didn't see the door open. He didn't see the door close. He just all of a sudden, this figure was at the next to his bed, and the angel. I said, "Well, what was this person doing? I mean, some people come in here, they're drawing blood. Some are taking your blood. What was this angel doing?" He said, "We pretty much just looking at me." And he said, "Chaplain, I don't know if you think I'm crazy or anything, but I think he was communicating with me, even through his eyes and his mind and his heart." Didn't say a word, but what I was picking up was that God's love was present with me, and that I would be reassured by that, and that I'm his beloved child. And I said, "That's marvelous. That's marvelous." So anyway, so we finish out my visit. I go outside. There's the nurse who's outside the door, has been there charting for a little time. And I said, "Nurse, by the way, did you see someone come through in the last half hour or so?" No visitors tonight. And I said, she said, "Why do you ask?" I said, "Well, I think he had a visitor." And she said, "What are you talking about?" Should I have called security? I said, "No, no, no. But he had an angelic visitor, and his recount of that was very reassuring. In fact, I think if you will go back in there now, you'll see him a very calm, restful, getting ready to fall asleep. I don't know if he needed sleeping pills tonight. So um, I've also seen persons who experience the presence of deceased loved ones who come. What I describe in one of my modules I have on the AHEC site, death visions.
Wow.
So hospice chaplains tell me that every one of us will have a death vision when we die.
Yeah.
But not all of us will have a chance to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And but I've been with persons who've had that chance to talk about that. So just another story, if you would allow.
Yes, please.
So I'll go in to see someone on the oncology unit. This gentleman is suffering with cancer that has metastasized. He is but a skeleton of himself. He's got to be in his late 70s. He is into some of his last breaths. And again, the reason I go there is the nurses called and said, "Chaplain, the family, I think, needs some support. Could you come in and bring some support? We can tell the symptoms are he's getting close to end of life." I said, "Well, of course." So I go in and visit, and again, the man is he's conscious, but his eyes are closed. He's breathing hard. You can hear a little bit of the rattle that's going on. Extremities are cold. All the symptoms the nurses shared with me are true. About 8 family around the bedside, lovingly caring for him, and so I'm encouraging them. I said, "Now this is a wonderful time to share your stories with him, your appreciations, what you loved about what he provided for you, and actually, if there's anything you need to forgive him for, this is a great time to do that. Yeah. If there's anything you need to ask his forgiveness for, this is a great time. But this is a sacred time. He can still hear you. His eyes are shut. I know he's breathing hard, but he's still with us." And as I was sharing that, all of a sudden, this frail, semi-conscious patient sits up in a bolt-like fashion, just sits up quickly, and is now sitting up straight in his bed, and he's staring at the wall in front of him. And the family says, one family member said, let me get the nurse, he must be in pain." I said, hold on a second, let me just check. I said, "Mr. So-and-so, I'm Chaplain Carl. I'm here at the request of your family. But I can't help but notice your eyes are wide open. You're looking at that. Do you see anything?" And he nodded and said, "Yes." And I said, "Could you tell me what you're seeing?" And he started naming about 6 to 8 different family members who had died before him. Some of whose names some of the family in the room didn't know about, but others did.
Oh my goodness.
And they were hearing this reunion of sorts, kind of a welcoming party. And then he says, "Oh my gosh, wait a minute, who's that?" And he said, "Oh my, could that be?" He said, "That, I think that's Jesus." And so everybody's crying their eyes out. Still affects me to this day.
I know. Oh, can't imagine.
He just kind of smiles and nods and has this air of contentment about him. And I don't know how I found the words, but I said, and what's Jesus saying? He's saying, welcome home. And then he lied back down, and within a matter of minutes was dead.
Wow. That's powerful.
A lot of conversions in that room that day.
I bet.
The persons who sometimes wonder, is my loved one going to heaven? Or is my loved one going someplace else? All those answers got squared away right now.
Beautiful.
And persons who were in the room, they started talking about the different relatives and the profundity of them experiencing this patient having seen the Christ
that is amazing.
at the time of death.
I have never had a patient experience that. Wow.
So that's called a death vision.
Yes.
And like I said, I think all of us have those.
Yeah.
But not many of us, like he, had a chance to unpack it.
Well, I have a question. Part of the reason I called you is because when I was in the ICU, a patient next to me, I had talked to one of the nurses about these experiences I was witnessing, and she said, oh yeah. And she said, have you ever had one that had a bad experience? And I said, oh no, mine have all been positive, the ones that I had. And she said, oh, and about a week later, she comes to me, her patient had coded, and we were all, doing the code, and he did come back, and she came and got me. She said, come here and look at my patient. Look at his eyes. He had a horrific experience, and I will never forget the look on his face. And I know he wanted the chaplain called for immediately. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the reasons I'm here right now, because I thought chaplains see so many things. So I don't know. I didn't know if I wanted to know what happened with his experience. And I don't know if this is something physiologic, that you could say, well, if you're in a state of fear at the time. And I believe there is a heaven and a hell personally, mm-hmm. But have you seen, I'm scared to ask you this, have you seen people have a negative experience? And if you had to say, in all the ones that you had, if you had to give it a percentage that were good and a percentage that were scary, what would you answer?
So yes, I've had both reported to me. I would say a very small percentage of the negative.
Yay, that's good.
There have been some who've experienced that, but as and who had a chance to talk about it, they experienced that as a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. And so that led to a conversion of thought and mind, the least, and yes. It was kind of like, oh, well. And it really fits with my own theology, which is I don't think I think it's important that we live the life that we can, and that we're as faithful as we can be. None of us live a perfect life. We all make mistakes. We all fall short. There's always forgiveness, and sometimes forgiveness comes at the very end of life. And so particularly when patients, family members say to me, I'm just afraid he's going to hell, Chaplain. He's never been to church. He's never been baptized. He's never been, well, I have to share with them that, well, there's going to be a meeting, and it might be a last minute altar call of sorts, but it is known to happen. I said, that's even, I think, what's in the Bible when Jesus tried to talk about the workers in the fields. Mm-hmm. Some people work all day long, and some people work half a day, and some people work a quarter of a day, and some people just show up last minute and they get the same pay. And I said, that ticked off the disciples. They didn't like that. What are you talking about? And I said, well, but I think that's how it is. I think it's we have this last minute opportunity, this last moment opportunity to reconcile.
So God's grace, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also love to teach psychiatrists and psychologists the difference between a vision and a hallucination and a delusion, because sometimes we get that mixed up in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the quickest way I can get to that is, and when I worked in a federal psychiatric hospital,
that
I was getting
it.
all of that.
Oh, yeah.
But it was to the point where sometimes scientifically we can think, well, it's all delusional. No, none of that other stuff's real. Well, this is where I get a chance to be a chaplain and say, no, you be careful. Don't become a naysayer. I think, aren't you a scientist? Yes. Well, scientists don't say no to something they don't understand. So, nor do they say yes to something they don't understand. Skepticism, I'm there. I'm with you. I can meet you in your skepticism, but don't be a yaysayer or a naysayer and just dismiss something because you just don't know about it. That's
Mm-hmm.
not what scientists do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that rankles that belief system. It's kind of fascinating to see, but but I've had occasion where a patient in a psychiatric facility said, Chaplain, I had a vision. An angel came to see me last night, and they told me to I should, as soon as I get out of here, I should go and finish what I started to do. And I said, what was that? He said, well, the reason I'm here is the Secret Service caught me. I was in line to go into the White House, and I was going to assassinate the president.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, and this being told you to do it again? Yes. I said, well, I've just got to say to you, by the authority
Mm-hmm.
I have as a chaplain, that was not God's agent.
No.
That was not God's agent. Anytime somebody tells you to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else, that's not God's voice.
No.
There are the voices out there.
Yes.
He said, yes. I said, well, that was not God's voice. So I want you to start working on discerning what is God's voice and what are some other voices that can lead you to destructive behaviors, which became part of a treatment plan, part of what he was started to do. But he never had somebody coaching him on that.
Yeah.
It was almost like if he had said that to the team, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of the team, but the temptation is when somebody says something outlandish like that, well, let's pump him up with more drugs, or let's keep him, he needs seclusion for X number more hours, whatever it might be. Well, that's not the issue. I think it's a delineation between, and making a distinction, and saying to him, there's hope for a vision, and I hope you have a vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to talk to you about that vision when it happens. But that wasn't a vision.
Mm-hmm.
That was a hallucination, or that was a delusion. So let's get out of that, and let's aim at the other.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, definitely. Not assassinate someone. I want to ask you, we're running a little out of time, and I have so much I want to ask you. Okay, the role that faith plays in healing. I've been touched by so many beautiful people sharing with me their healing journey, how they were healed from terminal illness. Now, you're working in a hospital, and you see this all the time. Now, when I even put these out there, it's a beautiful thing, but then I think about that person who's not getting the ending that they want.
Mm-hmm.
How do you explain why God heals certain people and why certain people don't get healing? What role does the faith play in that?
I can't explain that.
Had to
I
ask.
think it's beyond my tiny mind
Mm-hmm.
and anybody else's tiny minds on this planet, if we're humble enough to confess that.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we have to, at times, say, thy will be done.
Yeah.
I do see that some people are connect up that to the degree that I'm fervent with my faith, or to the degree I'm entrenched in my faith, that somehow that gives me a added edge. Well, that's not true. Because if you think about all the saints, in fact, those who are out of the Christian tradition, those who are out of a Hindu tradition, those who are out of other traditions, many times it's the ones who are the practitioners of the holy, their life ends quicker than others. Mm-hmm. And so we don't get a bypass pain card. We don't get a I'm going to prolong my life card. And I don't think it's just something that's beyond our tiny minds to comprehend.
I agree. I had to ask.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your question, because I do think some people confuse praying for God's will and with telling what God's will ought to be.
Yeah.
And that can be that can set up some very difficult grief dynamics.
Yeah. I think it's trusting his plan, even though we can't see the whys. This has been amazing. I do want to ask you, in all of your experience that you've had, these amazing stories, if you were on your way out today to meet your maker.
If I were dying.
Yes. I have a hard time saying it. We're in a hospital. I'm a nurse. If you only had one thing you could say to the world, be on your way out, after all that you've seen, and obviously we know spirits are real, we know angels are real, we know there's a life after this, what would be the one thing you would tell people?
Well, in some ways, it's the same thing I've been telling folks in my earthly journey so far, and that is be open to the extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Don't get limited and distracted by all of the earthly activity that's going on here. Some spiritual masters say that Earth is a school, and there are only two required courses that we're to take. One course is, how do I better love? Mm-hmm. And the other course is, how do I better serve? All the other learning activities we get caught up in are extracurricular, and we make them up. Mm-hmm. And it becomes intertwined, if not confusing, and at times even meaningless. But I would say, number one, to know that we are each of us have opportunity in these temporarily able bodies of ours. We have the sacred presence of a soul. The soul is in communion with the Creator. And part of our charge is to try to continue to find ways to strengthen that connectivity. Don't beat ourselves up for when that doesn't happen, but keep looking for tuning into that frequency. Mm-hmm. Just knowing that God's, the Creator, whatever you call the divine, that love is continually showering down. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like having a house with electricity and not turning the light on. So we're in charge of our own button, mm-hmm. of finding ways to ramp up that light, turn on the switch, open up, allow for the connectivity, and enjoy when that happens.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up just by saying I hope you enjoyed this today. I feel immensely blessed to have had this opportunity. And again, I thank you for your work as a chaplain. You are so valuable to everything that's happening in this facility and outside of it too, people that you come in contact with. So thank you for listening. And if you have a miracle you would like to share, please reach out to me at everydaymiraclespodcast.com. Thank you, and God bless.